Hi, everybody. So, I'm so excited to be live today. And yeah, today it's not just me, gonna be joined by Allison in a moment. And yeah, I'm just waiting for a second. We're going to dive probably deep into some deep stuff, but necessary. So, let's see. So I'm just waiting for her to join me here. Yeah, lovely.
So hopefully, here I am. Where am I? Oh no, that's all.
Yes, here you are.
Right. How funny.
Hi,
Hey,
Alison.
how are
We
you?
made it.
No, I'm excited.
Perfect. Well, I'm so happy you joined me today here on an Instagram Live for some, yeah, I would say deep conversations, right?
Yeah,
We're diving deep, but necessary. And yeah, so we just see where we're going, but I guess we are talking about like all things New Earth and like the matrix and how we can really alchemize our own inner shadows to contribute to a like collective awakening. So yeah, we talked a little bit already, and I really love what you're into, and I really have like yeah, I think it's so necessary to allow ourselves to appreciate that the journey of awakening is not only love and light, but also messy and ugly, as you said already, right?
yeah,
And
definitely.
I think
Absolutely.
we can become actually comfortable in kind of like being in this uncomfortable space of the shadow, right? I think that's what it is. It's we're so afraid of diving into that, but actually, if we have tools and if we have awareness and so on, we can actually kind of like relax into it. And sometimes I have to say, I even, like kind of like to discover new parts of my shadows or something, because if you know that you can alchemize it and you can, yeah, birth something new out of it, then actually it's just part of our journey. It's a beautiful thing, but I'm already going into it, so maybe you just want to share for a moment, yeah, just a little bit about yourself and what you're doing, and then we're going into some topics.
Sure, sure. So my name's Alison, and I'm actually living in Australia at the moment, but I'm from New Zealand. And in some ways, I think I've been on my evolutionary journey kind of for quite some time, but I really dug deep into it about 7, 8 years ago when I undertook a shamanic apprenticeship with First Light Flower Essences of New Zealand. And so it was an online program. So I studied for 3.5 years, and it was essentially working with the allies from nature. And so, although I had come from a kind of my dad was worked in a farm, and I lived on farm and very close to nature and stuff like that. I had become very, I guess, urbanized in a way, and noticed that that really threw off a lot of the natural rhythms and cycles that kind of nature is there to guide us through. And so most of that apprenticeship was generally a lot of tussle between my ego and my personality about this is how things kind of have to be, and wanting to evolve and grow into the next kind of element, I guess, or dimension of who I was. And so there was a lot of tension and conflict, to be pretty simple, but that's necessary sometimes when you're walking this path, because you sometimes need to have that crack in consciousness that occurs in order to have a change in perception, because that's if I was to narrow it down to something really simplistic, evolution is essentially a change of perception. It is looking at the same thing in a different light. And that could be something as easy as, you walk down the street, and instead of walking down the street on your phone or something like that, you actually walk down the street and you look around you at, the trees, the birds, the animals, the children playing and stuff like that, and you get a real deep appreciation for things. And so this change of perception from this kind of device that we have to what actually is out in reality, it really does matter. And so in the work as a shamanic practitioner, I delved a lot in, so there's three worlds that we can traverse in, which are the upper world, which are generally kind of like angelic beings, but like higher guides and higher dimensions. And then you've got the middle world, which is kind of like our reality that we have now, but there's a veil behind what we can see, and there's other creatures and beings that we can interact with on this plane. And then there's the lower world, which is essentially like the Shadowlands kind of thing. And so I got very well versed in walking in these lower worlds and lower realms, not only of my own kind of psyche and personality architecture, but also collectively. So I became very, I think one of the words that I would describe myself as is curious. So I have a curious nature, and because of that, I wanted to find out more. I wanted to find out why I behaved the way that I did, and why I did certain things. And finding that out in concurrent lifetimes or parallel lifetimes was really important for me. And so I just kept looking. And I noticed that when I had my son, which was about 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, that really amplified that need for me to find out, because I read a lot of books from Maria Montessori, and so from the age of 0 to 7, essentially we're in a theta brainwave state, which is highly programmable. And so a lot of the like behavior traits and personality traits and things that I exhibit as an adult are essentially created when I was from 0 to 7. And so I really wanted to dive into that, and that's kind of how I became quite adept at looking at my shadow, looking at my, some would say, your inner child, the wounded aspects of self, those bits that are really ugly, messy, that you wanted to push away, that you wanted to disown, disavow, disembody yourself for, that you thought you'd lost or you gave away, or things like this. And so it was kind of a matter of gathering up all of these perceived bits of me out in the ether and kind of bringing them all back into myself. And it's really rewarding, really, really rewarding. I will say that my dimension, I guess, as a person, evolution as a person, the dimension and the texture, the tone and the color that I have in my life is because of my shadow. It provides me with depth. It provides me with kind of this real luminous quality that everybody has. And it's only because I'm able to be willing enough to look my shadow in the eye and go, okay, what is it you have to tell me? And that's really amazing work, because the work that I do for myself is the work that I do on the collective, as above, so below, Hermetic philosophy and forth like that. So yeah, it's really amazing, really amazing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that's all I always say, like, the individual is the collective, right? So you are always doing the work for the collective. And it's the thing of like where we find ourselves in right now is like, yeah, it's a beautiful thing to say like, okay, we're just waiting for someone to save us here, for someone to come and be like, okay, I'll put you on a plane, I'll bring you onto another planet where everything is like, different. But actually, really, but as you also said, there is power in it, right? There is power in knowing that we actually do play a role and we are important, right?
Definitely.
We can shift all together. This is also there's so much power in that. And what I really liked what you said is, as you explained, like from your own journey, like this being curious. And I think that's the way how we shift how we perceive things, right? If we are able to just start asking questions, like just the simple thing of asking questions, like, why do I do that? Why do other people do that? Why do we all do that since we were little, right? and just like asking these questions. But I think many people are just also so afraid of like maybe not having an answer to that. So I'm like a firm believer in the unknown, the space of the void, where the space in between where you don't know why or what or how,
Yeah.
but being able to sit in that space. And I think that's the thing, like asking questions and not having immediate answers. Because maybe you don't know yet where your shadows are, you don't know yet how you have been programmed from 0 to 7 and all of these things, but just realizing, okay, something's off, something's off. I don't know why I'm doing this or why the world is doing this. And then going deeper into that. And I really love how you described like when we deal and work with our shadows, that it actually brings out more of our inner medicine of who we are. Because
Definitely.
I feel, it's so hilarious, right? I mean, especially in these times, um, the the function or like this thing of wearing a mask, right? Like we do also when we suppress our shadows, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
so afraid that other people might see that, so we always pretend to be like, no, I'm okay, but deep down there are the shadows. But like realizing that actually when we work with them and we can alchemize them, they bring something out that is so much more, um, yeah, attractive in that sense. So much more alive, I want to say. That's it. I mean, often when I walk around, and me included, I still have parts, but I feel like, where are the people? Are they alive? Are they really living their true self, right? Are they alive, or are they just operating within a system, within a collective system? And
Definitely.
yes, maybe you want to talk a little bit about this process of alchemy, of alchemizing our own shadows, and how this contributes to like the collective, dealing with the collective shadow as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, with Hermetic philosophy, if we talk about Hermetic philosophy, as above, so below, as within, so without, and the work that I do, which comes from Carolyn Myss, the work that I do for myself is the work that I do for everybody. And so, taking that kind of philosophy and really taking it to heart means for me that there is, yes, responsibility on my own personal journey. So my own personal responsibility to myself to evolve and grow as much as I potentially can within this parallel life that I have. But also at the same time, knowing that maybe there are things that are within me, certain aspects of or facets of my kind of shadow that I am capable of looking at, that mean potentially that's something that I can look at. And so it gives that capacity, because there's an energetic kind of quality that happens when you uncover that shadow and you kind of look under it. It's basically like a rock in some ways, where you look at it and it seems like one thing, but then you pick it up and you look underneath it and it's something completely different. Like if you're willing to look at that energetically, it means that you're making that connection and acknowledgement and witnessing. And then at the same time, it allows it to ripple out into the collective. And where someone may be, wherever they are in that collective, it also means that if it's something they're dealing with at the moment, they can have that kind of like more energetic capacity to look at it for themselves. So that's kind of what the energetic ripple is when it sends out. So by having no fear, because it really takes a lot of fearlessness and courage to do stuff like this, because it is ugly, it is messy, it can be really violent at times, it can be really unpalatable to look at. But I found that the kind of most raw, dark, kind of dirty aspects that I've witnessed in my own journey of uncovering the shadow have been the most beautiful things that I have ever seen in my life. And it gives me great compassion for myself for being like, oh my God, I did that. I can't believe I did that. It's amazing. Because what happens is you essentially like break these bonds that have kept both of you in servitude in some senses, and it breaks these bonds apart, which are like chains that tie you to this time and place and space, and it allows you to get momentum, perspective and energy so that you both can rise. And in this kind of metaphysical way that you're working with it, it actually happens on the collective as well. And so this is what happens energetically or in the quantum when you're working with your shadow and you liberate the shadow from the darkness to the light in some ways. You have the capacity to liberate that within the collective as well. And so that is, I guess, a really simple way that it works, you know, our own personal shadow work, and even just working with an inner child and those kind of sensitive aspects of ourself, and bringing them all to the table. I think Carolyn Miss kind of described it quite brilliantly, where, you know, you basically, I kind of am the person that am at like a table, and I'm inviting all of these aspects of myself to eat and dine with me and have conversation with me, and, you know, get to know them better and form relationships, because that's a really important thing, is forming relationships. And at the end of the day, I can get up and go, okay, that's fine now, you guys can all go now. You know, and that's fine. They can all go back to where they need to go and do what they need to do, wherever they go back to. And that's, I think, a real powerful thing about having relationship with these aspects of self that I thought were separate, isolated, alone, kind of parts that I didn't really want to look at. It provides space for everyone to be at the table. But it also gives you the capacity and the power to then go, okay, that's fine, I'm going to bed, you guys can all kind of leave now. And it's a capacity that you have compassion for not only your own journey and the things that you've seen, but you have compassion, such compassion for other people, because we're all wanting to evolve and grow. And evolving and growing is what the soul wants to do, but there is this tension that is created between the ego or the personality that just wants things to be comfortable. It wants things to stay the same. And it also strangely sees things dualistically. And so that's where, in some ways, separation kind of occurs at an egoic or a personality level. When you're talking about soul, though, it's always talking about kind of love. And then, you know, when you're talking about your spirit, that is like, you know, infinite love, like limitless love. I don't know if humans can ever conceive of that kind of love, because it has no words, it has no description. It just is everywhere and permeates everything. So this is, I think, is a really amazing thing about looking at these parts of self, is that it liberates that energy and it liberates that stagnation that's occurred, not only within my own holistic being, but within the holistic collective self as well. And it enables, you know, if we're talking about like trains or something like that, it enables someone else to be able to see the path, or to be able to see there's something else in front of them and maybe walk forward a little bit more. It helps everyone to see in the darkness. It's such a strange paradox, but that actually is the beauty of the shadow. It allows you to see the light.
Yeah. As you mentioned, like, there is no light without dark, right? And I think that's something we have to acknowledge. And what's beautiful what you said, and I think that's something we just have to remind ourselves all the time, that we are here, right? We're in the physical body, in this physical vessel, but our soul has chosen to come here for this evolutionary process, right? So it's not just, it's nice all we have and we can enjoy and so on, but like really knowing, okay, we are here to go through this evolution, especially, I mean, these are our exciting times right now, right? These are special, extremely special times. And so this is really about, okay, we are moving forward as humanity. We are changing, we are shifting, we're going through this evolution, and we are all playing a part in that, just simply by being here on planet Earth, right? It's like not really that you can say, no, I'm just staying here. No, I don't want to. It's like you can, but you're still part of it. You're still contributing, as you say, you're still contributing to the collective. And then for me, the thing is like asking yourself, how do I want to contribute to the collective, and how do I want to contribute to the evolution? And where are these parts I have not been looking at within myself, right? That are then reflected actually in the collective. And I think when we work with our shadows, it's so I mean, maybe you can share from your own experience or experience with working with others. Like, why do you think that we are so afraid of like really confronting our own shadows? I mean, this actually leads to this whole process, right? Death and rebirth. So
Yeah,
I really think like it's like, why are we so afraid of that? Because we are afraid of death. I mean, not in that sense, death of our physical body, but each time we confront something is dying. I mean, even something is dying when we change how we perceive things, right? Because we let go of one perception and we're stepping into another one. And this is, I always say, we're like dying and we're being reborn like I don't know how many times in our lives, right?
constantly,
So
constantly. Yeah.
yeah. So actually, I come to enjoy this process.
Yeah.
I mean, being,
You're
yeah,
doing so
like
well.
in that moment, dying, sometimes it's really, really messy, ugly, and uncomfortable. And sometimes it's like, okay, I've been through that already, you know, and I know there's like a light at the end of the tunnel. I'm going to emerge out of it. But yeah, as you also said, like with this training, with this path, you know, like taking the first step. And I always also think that people often think like, okay, I have a look at that, or I work with my inner child, whatever, and then everything changes, you know, and then I'm like this kind of like new person, and then that's it. But as evolution is, right, we are
Yeah.
work in progress. So
Oh,
this is all,
totally.
you can
Totally.
always dive deeper into your shadows.
Yes, yes,
Um,
you can.
and yeah, I mean, there is like a level where you say, okay, it's kind of like maybe I know my shadows and you have like had these big, huge transformations and everything, but then still there's always more. But I feel like so many people, and I say this with compassion, right? Because I know what it's like to say, like, okay, I'm going to dive in now. But they are so afraid of taking that first step. But if they would know what kind of um, liberation is on the
Yeah.
other side of that, right? So
Huge.
yeah, maybe you can
Huge.
share a little bit what you think is like one of the main reasons why people yeah, and especially in this time right now, so afraid of
Yeah,
taking
I
this path.
mean, I think I feel for myself, probably I'll reference it to myself because that's probably the easiest thing to do. I don't really want to make generalizations, but for me, the what I saw, I mean, kind of, I'll go back to my childhood because that probably explains a lot about why I'm able to dabble in these worlds. So I come from a particular cultural context where death is quite the norm. And so I grew up in New Zealand in the Māori culture, and death is kind of in some ways quite revered and quite honoured.
Mhm.
And there's a particular ritual and process that gets undertaken. It's a 3-day process. We grieve the person who has passed, and they lie in state so everyone can come and see them and say their goodbyes. And then at the end, when they are buried, we have a huge thing called like a hakari, which is a feast. And so that's where we celebrate the life of the person. And so there's a lot of kind of laughter and tears and sadness, and it's all in some ways purged in this process. And so I went to a lot of these when I was younger. My dad is from a family of 16, my mum's from a family of 11. So, you know, having that kind of constancy with death and rebirth was
Mhm.
pretty much normal in my life. And it's not until I stood outside of that and kind of moved outside of New Zealand that I realized that was actually quite unique. So I
Mhm.
think part of it is actual the cultural context, and it more often I think it stems from what do you call it, colonization, that kind
Mhm.
of particular aspect where there is a real fear around death itself, like the physical act of death. And I think part of that is most likely a religious overlay that comes over the top of it when we're kind of talking about sin and death and just the end of everything. And then it's kind of woven in with this fear that's around death. And because of that, there's also this kind of other overlay with language as well, which is really powerful. And certain words like dark or black or mystery or kind of the void and things like these were became part of, I guess, a war in some ways. So it was
Mhm.
looked at really fearfully instead of with curiosity in a way. And so these particular cultural overlays have contributed to, I feel, the way that the collective views the shadow. It's in reality, it's just a aspect of self that wants some time in the sun, so to speak. And it's kind of tapping you on the shoulder to want to have a conversation and a relationship with you. And so because of the capacity that I had of kind of walking with death, because I was quite close to it as a child growing up, and it became quite an acceptable part of my life, I'm quite happy, it's a weird way of putting it, but I'm actually quite comfortable with death and rebirth, because if we look into nature and we just look even at the cycles of the season, like as a big broad stroke, like there is within that cycle of the season, death and rebirth everywhere. It happens everywhere we look in nature. There is always death and rebirth, because in the death and the dying, it actually creates, in some ways, a fertile ground in which something can be reborn in. And so that's in some ways the function of death as well. The function of death is to let go of that which is no longer serving us or no longer has a function anymore, and using that as like fertilizer, also so forth, to fertilize what's germinating and wanting to come through. And that's, I guess, the really amazing thing about it. Within a shamanic kind of context as well, there's a saying that we have, which is 1,000 deaths upon you. And it's something that's meant with, when we say it to people, as like kindness and love, because that's what we wish upon someone. And the 1,000 deaths upon you is actually those constructs of ego and personality. You go to sleep, that is a death and rebirth process. Like when you go to sleep and you wake up in the morning, that's a death and rebirth process. You're reborn anew with the awakening of the sun, from like an alchemical and magical perspective. So it's everywhere around us when you kind of start to see it. But it's also something, I think, that's been misaligned and kind of, I think demonized is probably too strong a word for it, but it's definitely been pushed to the side. And because of that, it's been, if you don't look at something, it kind of appears to be much more than what it is. Whereas if you look at it dead in its face, it has its own kind of space and place for you. So I think the biggest thing, if I was to kind of think about it and pull it down, if anyone ever wanted to work with this kind of medicine, because it is medicine, the choice to do that is actually the biggest thing that you could possibly do. Choice, I think, and also a willingness to let go of what you think it may or may not be, like you were talking before about a willingness to sit in the void and not have the answers and not know. I think that's a really big thing about humanity at the moment, is like we're craving answers, but we just don't want to sit in the silence for the answers to come. There's too much noise, and the answers don't come in noise, because usually the noisiest things are kind of your ego, that small still voice, which is your heart or your soul speaking. It's a lot quieter, and you're only really going to hear it when you're in silence and solitude and stillness. And in some ways, that's like the breath, the in-breath, there's that spaciousness on the in-breath just before you exhale. That's kind of like the void as well. And that is also a process of death and rebirth. Like, for you to really like crack it down, like it's everywhere around us. We cannot avoid it, everywhere around us. And I guess it's quite interesting how something that's so permeable within our very structures of existence seems to be I guess misappropriated in such a unusual way, or looked at as being kind of dark or unpreferred or something like that. But there is great medicine in the shadow. There is great power in the shadow, and great sovereignty, self-sovereignty in the shadow.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's just,
that's lovely what you share, and especially the part of sovereignty and what you said, like self-responsibility. It's about choice, right? I guess so many of us, they are waiting for something to happen, or they're waiting to have the answer first before they take the leap and change something, right? Because they don't want to step into that space of the unknown, of the void. But actually knowing that, well, each and every one of us has to do the work in that sense, right? So we have to choose to want to change something, to want to step into like our shadows, etc. And yeah, but as you said as well, I think it's like this just putting labels on things. And
Yeah.
so if like we don't, yeah, I mean, you have a background where that's what really, like part of your daily life in that sense, and you honored it completely differently than we do, or like where I come from in Germany. And so I think it's completely right what you said with um, the things we don't talk about and that are not present in our lives. It seems like this is a big danger, right? So
Yeah.
like, oh, no one's talking about it, so it must be something like really dark and creepy and unsafe. Like, okay, because no one's talking about it, I'm not talking about it, and then I'm so often wondering, because it's so interesting actually how everything is interwoven, right? And we as a collective, because once we have like this kind of mass formation of a belief, of a
Yep.
perception, everyone's running within that. And
Yes.
even if everyone subconsciously is thinking like, I don't know, something's off with that, but like, okay, everyone's doing it, so I'm just running with that. And then I think like when everyone thinks like that, but it's just doing it because someone else is doing it, I'm like, oh my God, what are we doing? It's like a shit show in the end, right? But the beautiful thing about that, is like you also said, like working with a shadow and then being reborn and bringing out the medicine of it, is like, if we know that that's the way we operate, or like everything is interwoven, we can also change that, right? We
Yeah.
can also install like a new perception and
Yeah.
know that it ripples out with everyone who's living that in authenticity. So I think this is really, the magic. And when it comes to what we're going through right now, and the shift is like realizing we are the creator, and we have created the reality we're in right now. If we want a different reality, we can create it also, right?
Definitely.
But it's like really interesting how yeah, this kind of like programming works, so everyone thinks like, wait, this is just the only reality we are in, right? And but when you allow yourself, and I think, like you said, death and rebirth is like just when we go to sleep and wake up the next morning, right? So like it's everywhere. And I think that's maybe the first step, to allow yourself to see, to just start to see death and rebirth in your daily life. You don't have to say like, okay, I'm going into like my biggest fear, my biggest shadow right away, but just, like these little death and rebirth, like a little death of like just really standing in your sovereignty and speaking your truth. And it feels
Yeah.
like a death because, the other person has another opinion about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then feeling the rebirth of how you feel afterwards after speaking your truth. I think that's maybe a way how we can slowly, step by step, approach these
Well,
shadowlands.
definitely. That's definitely a way to do it as well, because within that kind of quality that you're talking about, like speaking our truth and being authentic, that is also linked into a cultural overlay or a conditioning that relates to being persecuted for speaking our truth. And this is something that they talk about, they call it the witch wound, I guess, in some senses. But it is something that I mean, I myself personally believe in reincarnation. So I believe that I have had multiple lifetimes across multiple timelines, in multiple kind of dimensions. And so having that, I guess, understanding for me allows me in some ways to have, I guess, more spaciousness when I talk about things like that, because I don't really have that. I mean, I did kind of a religious smorgasbord when I was younger to kind of experiment with lots of different religions and spirituality and stuff like that, but I didn't really fall into anything and stay there. And so this curiosity has really helped me to kind of look at it from everyone's point of view and be okay with that, because that is, I think, in part the evolution of the collective. What's happening at the moment is that there's so many differing points of views and opinions and things like that, that sometimes we just have to be okay that that exists, because it's never going to change. And part of the work that I did, which was quite full on last year, was a deconstructive process around decolonization. And the real crux of it came for me, like the real medicine came for me, when I realized, because I have an Indigenous background, in my my other kind of lineages from England, Scotland, Ireland. And so I really had to dig into my like ancestry and my shadow around things like what were happening at the moment, you know, like what is white, what is black, what is oppression, what is the oppressor, what is violence, and all of these kind of things. And I had to, like, I actually had to force myself to reconcile those two opposing forces, so to speak, within myself, because I had to. Because if I didn't, I would be hating on a part of myself, because I would be hating on a part of my lineage, my family, my kind of genealogy. And so that's another way that I looked at it as well, like working with the shadow, is it's actually accepting all of those components within my genealogy, within my lineage, that may have been the victim and the vanquished, you know, the oppressor and the oppressed. Like, it's reconciling these kind of dualities and these kind of seemingly paradoxes within myself that gives me even more compassion for, like, myself, more compassion for my family, and more compassion for, like, my human brothers and sisters. Because it's huge when you have that realization that, you know, even within my own family, I had those two opposing forces, so to speak, and I had to reconcile them. Otherwise, there would forever be that separation within myself, and I didn't want that to happen. And that was really powerful when I made that kind of perceptual shift, which then, you know, it extends out once you kind of understand that. Once I understood that for myself, it extended out to other people in the collective. I was just like, oh my gosh, like, I have such compassion for you, for the way that the world in general is very genealogically kind of mixed, you know, and to deny part of my ancestry would be to deny myself. And there was no way that I was going to let that happen, because I had to reconcile it myself, and I had to love all of those parts of me, which meant that I could actually love all of those parts in somebody else. And that was huge work. Really, really confronting, though. I must admit, that's probably some of the toughest work that I've ever done. But it was amazing, because now I can look at people and go, oh my gosh, I really love you. Like, and be very kind of just honest about them. Like, I really love you because you're human. And I see your humanity, but I also see your divinity. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And I think this is really the most important work we need to do as individuals and as a collective right now, right? It's really this, like, having compassion for everyone's journey. And also, you said when you, like, go into your, like, lineage and ancestors and everything, like, there are also parts where you say, like, okay, no, you know, like, no way I'm like a part of that, or that is a part of me, right? But as you said, like, confronting these shadows as well. And I think, first of all, seeing this kind of polarity and separation within oneself, so you can actually realize it in the collective. Because I think that's a huge thing also, like the separation that's happening right now. And I do understand why one wants to bypass that and just say, like, no, there's no separation, you know? Because realizing that there is a separation out there would be realizing there is a separation within me. Somehow I contributed to that. And I think this is like, no way. I did everything to be, you know, the perfect human being, and I did this, that, and so on. You can't tell me I created what we are in right now, in a way. And I say, yeah, you did, you know, to some extent we all did. Different levels, different parts of it, but we did. And yeah, I think this is so beautiful. So this part of, like you said, yeah, I just love you because you're a human being, right? You're a human being, you're here, this is like your innate purpose, being here, going through this evolutionary process, being a human being and having your own journey. And I think when we allow ourselves to agree to disagree, right, there's so much medicine in that. And that's really a journey for myself as well, because also I always have been quite open to the opinions of other people, seeing things differently. But I always kind of like wanted to that other people understand my opinions, right? I didn't want to be wrong in that sense. When someone says like, no, I don't agree with that with you, I would feel like, okay, well, something's wrong with me, right? So this is like, or this was and still is a big part for me. But I think it's for each and every one of us, right? Because that that's our innate longing to be accepted, right? And to be loved. And yeah, and when someone says like I disagree, it's like, oh my God, I don't belong anymore now. And I think this is so, that's when, yeah, compassion comes again, right? It's like we all want to belong, and we don't want to see this polarity. And I think often it's when we are in a conversation and someone brings something up, and I feel like, okay, that's not how I see it. We want to convince the other one to see it the same way as we do, just to make ourselves comfortable in like how, in our own opinion, because it's easier. Like, no, I will convince you, and these are like just, these can be basic things. They don't have to be like huge things, but still it's like, if I know that you agree with me on that, I know that I'm good, right? My opinion is valuable, and these kind of things. And this is all human, right? But I mean, we are seeing it on this big scale right now, and I think there's no way to avoid that or to bypass that. It's like right in front of our eyes, and the division and separation, it will grow bigger if we are not able to like really sit in that space of the Shadowlands and of that like polarity.
It's uncomfortable, like it is uncomfortable, because in some senses, like what's happening metaphysically is like you're being stretched kind of like a rubber band. Like, so there's a point like where you've gone too far in some ways and you kind of bounce back, and you may kind of go back further and then come back forward again. So it is very much like a rubber band where you feel very stretched, and it can feel like there's a lot of tension, or pressure is probably the more appropriate word, on your holistic being. But usually we give up just before that kind of point happens, when we actually create something different, and we, open a change of perspective or a change in crack in consciousness or something like that. But the interesting thing that I've come to kind of, I guess, realize or understand from a human perspective is, opinions and perspectives are everywhere. Like, everyone has an opinion, everyone has a perspective. A couple of the things that have helped me is like, is it true, or is it real? Is it true? These questions that I constantly ask myself, even when I listen to other people when they talk to me, I'm like, is this real? Is this true? And a lot of the time I just follow my intuition, because it never really leads me astray. And so this is something that develops over time, and you just become really competent, I think, in sitting in the middle, because that kind of happens with me a lot. Like I have people who are very kind of like, feel like very left over here, and then people a bit right over here that are like on the extremes of the polarity and stuff. And sometimes just sitting in the middle and letting spaciousness exist allows for everyone to have their opinion in that space. And so sometimes I think that's kind of what's needed in humanity at the moment, is that agree to disagree. And there's space here for everyone to have their own spectrum of emotions and spectrum of experiences and kind of reality. Like everything in some ways is real, and everything is an illusion. And when you kind of start to look at things like this, like from a shamanic perspective, all illness, all dis-ease with humanity and humanity as a collective originates from the original spiritual sickness, which is the sickness of separation. That we are separate from God, that we essentially kind of fell out of favor from God. And so the part of the work that I've done, like with my shamanic apprenticeship and stuff, is realizing I was always whole. I was never broken. And in fact, I'm actually anthropas. I am fully human and fully divine. And when you kind of come to that awareness and you start to see it in other people, that also kind of, throws another compassion kind of lens at it, because we are all gods and goddesses. We are all made of the stuff of the cosmos, which is stardust and planets and all of this beauty. And it's hard not to be, I guess, humbled and live in wonder at the amazing place that we find ourselves in. I think maybe that's a little thing that's missing at the moment, is wonder. Maybe people should go outside, at dusk and dawn and watch the sunrise and the sunset. Maybe they should go outside and look in the sky and look at the stars at night. Like that sense of wonder, of realizing that I am this little in this amazing context, but I'm also in this amazing context, really does help change slowly your perception about who you are, what you're capable of, and also who your brothers and sisters are in humanity. But not just humans, like my brothers and sisters that are the trees and the plants and, the animals and stuff like that. You really start to have an appreciation for the interconnectedness of everything. And that is also stems from separation. We think that we are separate from nature, but we're not. We're an intrinsic part of nature, that ecosystem. We are part of the ecosystem. We are not the ecosystem by itself. And so when we start to kind of reconcile, I guess, these universal truths within ourselves, life does become much more easeful, I must say. And it becomes a lot more graceful in the kind of messiness that you can be as a human, of growing and evolving. But they are, I think, sometimes some really important perspectual shifts that you can go through. And it all kind of happens sometimes just from wonder and creativity and stuff. Yeah. So it's just fascinating.
Yeah, I feel that so much, like that we forgot to like really being in awe of just this human experience here, right? And I have this a lot. Like, I mean, I have times when I really feel like, the pain and everything of the collective and everything that's happening. And at the same time, I'm just so excited, to being like having this incarnation now at this time, right? Because we can change something now. We can do something. And I'm always someone who's like, okay, let's do something. Let's look for solutions. Let's acknowledge where we are, but also see where we want to go. And it's like, it's such an amazing time. Of course, it's challenging, but I think once we allow ourselves to really come to that face to face, like where we are now, and still, as you said, like I also think like with everything that's happening, but nature is still there, right? The sky is still there, the stars are still there, and that's so amazing. Mother Earth is not leaving us in that sense, right? Unless we decide to kind of like leave her. But everything's happening, and still we're here, still we are alive, and actually still everything is built for harmony and for that divine, right?
Definitely.
It's still there. It has not left in that sense. So, and we are all part of that source. So I always say no one is left behind unless they choose to, right? So we all have the same connection, right? It's maybe depends on the level of awareness and consciousness, but at the end we are all, like you said, we are all the same. And I also always say like we are like mini gods, right? God's consciousness is everywhere. We're like all like mini gods on our own journey. Okay, so maybe to end our conversation or to wrap up, what would you say that now, as we are like ushering into this new paradigm, however you want to call it, like new Earth or the Aquarian age, etc. And at the same time having this division and this separation. So where do you see like humanity is going, or what we need at that moment of time to slowly, step by step, like really go there.
Yeah.
I think a main part, and also from your perspective and your experience, is like, first of all, realizing, as we already said, that we are not separated, but actually like getting back in touch with nature, not only like going outside, but the nature within us too,
Yeah.
right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, I think probably from my training and probably from my background and my lifestyle when I was growing up as a child, I was always around nature. And so it was always, in some ways, quite enamored by nature and just the beauty and marvel at the kind of, I guess in some ways I still do, like wonder of even just looking at a flower. And just the beauty and the, like sometimes it's just like the beauty is just so much, I can't take it anymore, like of nature and a sunrise or a sunset. Or even like, you know, the laugh of a child's kind of voice when they're like giggling about something. Like there is such wonder and beauty everywhere around us. It's just, in some ways we've been conditioned to kind of look at the pain, the suffering and so forth like that. So, you know, where you focus and put your attention to, that's kind of what you generate and create and you manifest from that. So if you're able to extract yourself in some ways from that mindset and look at the beauty and the wonder all around you, you start to see the beauty and the wonder in people. And it can be a really small thing, but you know, it can be simple practices like being mindful of how you eat your food, being grateful for where your food comes from, going outside and just, you know, putting your bare feet on the earth itself and just sitting in silence and listening to kind of the birds and all of the insects and the animals and stuff around you, even the sounds of the city. Like it's just been connected into something else other than yourself. That's a huge thing, to have that capacity for silence, stillness, and solitude on kind of a daily basis is really, really helpful. I think from a collective perspective as well, one of the things that the evolution of my journey is the lone wolf kind of thing, like, oh, I can do it all by myself kind of vibe, and I'm out in the wilds all by myself and I don't have a pack to run with, and I kind of, you know, I have to do everything myself because I'm all by myself. When I did a creativity program, I realized that the biggest thing that I've been craving for my entire life is community. Finding like-minded individuals that you can actually have conversation and connection with is, I think, imperative in this day and age, because I think they did a study just recently that I was reading in New Zealand about mental health or something like that, and they say that because of what's happened over the last 2 years, the isolation and the separation that it's induced in people, the rates of mental health and depression and stuff like that have skyrocketed. It's isolation, it's the isolation. So when we find community, we actually find connection. And that's really, really important, because once we find connection, we can get to collaboration and co-creation with other people, which is really, I think, where the medicine lies with humanity, is co-creating this world that we know is here, with other people that have the capacity to do that. Like, it's collectively that we're going to be co-creating this new world, and it's in community that we're going to be co-creating this new world, although we can do it as individuals as well. Like the synergistic power and energetic capacity that comes from community, you know, with focused intent and attention, it can bring about this change so much more, I guess, easily and quickly, in a sense, depending on time. As you know, time's a construct. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. Silence, solitude, and stillness on an individual level, connection, community, and collaboration on a kind of collective level. I think those are the things that are really going to help us to kind of seed in and birth, which is what's happening at the moment. I mean, all of this stuff is basically just a huge birthing process that's coming through to be the midwives of this new earth that are coming through and birth this reality into existence. And we're doing that with our thoughts and words and deeds. You know, are Are they coming from a space of love? You know, are you talking to yourself with compassion, with kindness, with gentleness, with love? Are you talking to other people in that same capacity? Are you relating to people in that capacity? They talk about, you know, being heaven on earth. And I think also a huge thing, because it was something big for me that I needed to realize. I'm quite cerebral, so I'm out there a lot.
Yeah.
The way that this is actually going to come to manifest form is actually grounding it into reality. So for me, a lot of my mental macerations and kind of work that I do out here cerebrally, I have to actually ground it down into the earth and embody it. And that's when it starts to become a reality. That's when it starts to become something kind of tangible. I think we forget that we're humans on planet Earth. You know, we're a physical vessel, we're having a physical journey. We're spiritual beings having a physical journey. We're in this physical body for a reason, because we need to experience physicality. And I think maybe this is a part that has been not overlooked, because I notice it's starting to come into the collective now, like somatics, the actual grounding down of this amazing kind of reality that we're creating, bringing it through the veil from kind of thought down into form. It's grounding it, you know, we're grounding it, and grounding it can be, you know, writing about it, that's grounding it, or it can be painting something like that. And that's when it really starts to kind of amplify and accelerate and kind of really start this process, and help it be easeful for ourselves. Because I guess another part of my journey and evolutionary journey and stuff like that I discovered is suffering is also a choice. And so I decided maybe about 9 months ago, I would not suffer anymore for my transformations and my transcendence or anything like that anymore. I had done enough. And I was quite adamant about it. I will not suffer for my illumination, for my change in perception, my change in awareness. I've done it enough. I don't need to do it anymore. And I also, the other thing that I component with that is that I integrate everything when I sleep. So those two choices that I made and verbalized out loud to the universe mean now that generally my transformation process isn't as kind of messy and destructive as it used to be. And I'm really grateful for someone kind of even like verbalizing that was a choice that I could make. And so I've ran with it, and it's been actually quite amazing. So yes, this transformation, although it's huge and it's amazing and it's beautiful, just like birthing a child, you can choose whether or not, like, the level, I guess, of discomfort or pain that you want to experience in it. It can be easeful if you want it to be, and you make the choice for it to be. Yeah.
Wow, it's lovely, Alison. There was so much in that. Thank you for bringing up all of that, because I think this is so important, right? It comes back to choice and self-responsibility. And I think also what we've spoken about before is like experiencing a new level of being comfortable in these uncomfortable spaces, right? As you said, we can also choose. It does not have to be in always this ride of pain and of suffering.
Yeah.
But I also guess it's like once you've been through this process of death and rebirth a couple of times, right? You don't feel that uncomfortable in that space anymore like a few years ago, right? So you feel like, okay, like actually that's not so painful anymore, because I'm kind of like used to it, but in a good sense, because I know where it takes me, right? So the other side of that. And I really do feel that too, that the way forward is in like this collectively speaking, like community, collaboration, etc. Because I think the more we are isolated, the more we just face ourselves daily, right? We have no reflection in others. We have no mirror. But that's, I think, how we learn. It's like if we can't see the good in other people, it's maybe because we can't see the good within ourselves, right? But once we, like you say, once we see the beauty in nature, we can begin to, again, see the beauty in everyone around us. And so we have to find a way out of that isolation and still honoring our own space. And as you said, the stillness and like sitting in that. I think that is so important because we can also like just bombard ourselves, you know, like with other people all the
Yeah.
time and like just being busy and being distracted from actually what's happening within ourselves. But yeah, I think this is as always, we have two sides, right? And we are juggling all of our perceptions and
Yeah.
experiences in life. But it's a really wonderful way you like described how you think that we are moving into this kind of like new age. And so yeah, maybe now you want to share what I know that in the programs you were offering, you're basically like you were doing the work, right? Like we said, it's about the individual as part of the collective and awakening this in I really like this idea of like awakening our individual intelligence
Yeah.
that then is a part of the collective intelligence, because when we are talking about co-creation and collaboration, it's actually using the collective intelligence to build new systems, right? But the
Definitely.
collective intelligence is made out of all the little individual intelligence, and this is something we have to reawaken, I want to say, because it's always there, it's always within us,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
like the divine essence is always within us, but we've been programmed and just putting things aside, we don't want to look at it. But once we can like reactivate that
Mhm.
intelligence within us, it's like I see it as a ripple effect, right? There's then
It is so, yeah.
eventually not so much to do than just go out and share that, and then you will find the people. And what I love as well when we talk about community, right? It does not have to be this one huge, big collective community, but very like a lot of small communities having a different focus, right? Where
Yeah,
you feel
definitely.
like you're resonating with, and that's so beautiful because there is a place for each and every one of us,
Yeah.
right? But I think once we allow ourselves to like vibrate at that frequency, we send it out and we attract it. So yeah, maybe you want to share a little bit how you work with that in your programs.
Yeah, sure. So I've kind of done a couple of I guess trainings, if you were to call them that, and that it kind of form three pillars of the work that I do. And so that is as a medicine woman or shamanic practitioner, as an intentional creativity teacher, and also as an intuitive intelligence trainer. So these are kind of the three pillars of my work that I do out in the world. And the golden thread that kind of weaves all of these three together are the shadow, like having the capacity and the willingness and the curiosity to look at the shadow and then apply effort in order to transcend that shadow and kind of look at it in a different way. And so most of the work that I do goes on this kind of intentional descent and ascent through the subconscious. The way that I kind of equate it to is the epic poem, The Descent of Inanna, where Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, goes down into the underworld to see her sister, and she kind of dies there, and then her helper, maiden, I don't know, it's a terrible word of using servant, but her helper comes down and petitions for her to come back up. And it's basically about her change in perceptual on a metaphysical way, and how she actually transformed herself alchemically by going into her subconscious and in some ways not losing her innocence, but realizing what her innocence kind of had for her, and coming back as a more fiercer version of herself and a more complete version of herself. This is the work that I actually do on a individual basis, like one-to-one, or in a group container. So I found that a lot of people, although they can be quite deft at doing shadow work for themselves, sometimes it's actually nice to do it in community. And so what I've created is this container, or this space in which we can all inhabit and safely, in some ways, navigate the territory or the terrain of our unconsciousness or our lower worlds that we kind of exist in, and be able to do it together. And this is done over a time frame, so it's over a 13 moon time frame, and we use the epic poem of The Descent of Inanna as our framework or our architecture. So we go down into the subconscious, we find a story that we want to, like a genesis of our personality, so to speak, or a story that we've been sold and we've kind of kept with us, and how to reweave that story into something new, which is essentially going down into the Shadowlands and finding that, and then kind of being like, oh my God, this is amazing on the other side. The way that we do that is actually via a painting process. And so that's the kind of somatic aspects to it, which, you know, you're painting and you're moving the paint around. It's very symbolic. It's very archetypal work that we do. And it means a lot to the individual. So the actual end product is beautiful, and it does encapsulate and encode within itself the transformation process that you've undergone. It's an artifact, and there's like 13 layers or levels behind that of processing that you've gone through in order to reveal the shadow up into the light. It's a really safe process that I've found, because it has a defined boundaries within the canvas. So whatever happens in the canvas kind of stays in the canvas, so to speak. And that's part of the energetic work that we do with symbol and encoding spaces and stuff like that. So it is a intuitive container. And there's an opportunity still to kind of jump into the container at the moment. It's really transformational work. Like, that's the really only way that I can talk about it. Archetypally, what you're doing is you're actually creating an artifact or an image. Funnily enough, they generally look like mirrors of yourself, but kind of more divine in some ways, of a journey that you've undergone in your own subconscious, but it's actually reflected back to you in form, because you've transcended everything from thought down into form and embodied it and worked with it somatically, so you've grounded it into reality. All of these kind of amazing things that happen within this very simple painting process that we undergo, but there's such depth to it. And because it's in a group setting and it's a group container, you can actually go much deeper than what you could if you were an individual doing this yourself. And the way that I like to frame it is, you know, if you're down in the hole, for example, I will get down into the hole and I will crawl down there with you, and I will sit beside you and I will talk to you and I will offer you all of my tools and skills and abilities and experience that I can, so that you can then create out of the materials that you have of your own life experience a way to craft a ladder out of that hole, and then I will come out with you. I will not reach down there and pull you out, because you need to know how to do this yourself. So that's part of, I guess, my medicine, because I've crossed the terrain so often and so much and so deep. I can actually see that, and I'm willing to be that person that will stand beside you and go, I know you can do this. You totally can do this. You've got a hammer, you've got some nails, you've got some wood. How about we figure out a way to get out here? And, you know, you come back a changed person. You cannot help but be transformed by doing that stuff. And so this container is running for a year, 12 months. It's a pretty in-depth process where we work with both shamanic journey work, intentional creativity, intuition, intuitive intelligence, reweaving your own story that you have, creating a new genesis for yourself in essence. And when we do this work ourselves, we actually give everyone else in the collective the capacity to do that for themselves. So that's, you know, the work that we do as an individual is the work that we do for the collective. And I've found that in some ways it's the visionaries, the dreamers, the kind of artists, the musicians, the people that are normally in those liminal spaces that really have the capacity to kind of ground in and embody this kind of new earth template, if we were to call it as such, via the capacity that we have for being, in some ways, edge walkers. We are out in those liminal spaces a lot of the time, even though we might not know it. We're quite deft at being out there in the unknown, and that takes real skill, but I know that a lot of people have it, and I know that a lot of people want to use that skill in order to not only help themselves but also to help the collective, because it's all about service. So yeah, it's called Transcend, walking with creativity into the Shadowlands. And so if you want some more details on it, there's a link that you can go into in my profile, and Instagram. I'm all over Facebook and stuff like that, or my website, which is AllisonHaitana.com. So ALISON Haitana.com, and there's some details there as well. So yeah, it'd be amazing to have anyone on board if they're interested, or just contact me and we can talk through stuff.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah. So for everyone's watching or watching this on the replay, make sure to follow Allison if this resonates with you, diving deeper into the Shadowlands. And I just want to end by saying I really love how you bridge these worlds, right? Because I think that's what it is about as much as, and I see this a lot like in the spiritual community, this urge for like always going into higher dimensions and, this whole thing about ascension, but we cannot, in my opinion, that's my opinion, we cannot ascend without descending first, kind of like, descending into the Shadowlands, and from there we are going to ascend. And basically also that this ascension process is not about actually like escaping into higher dimensions and thinking like, okay, we're going onto another planet. No, I mean, for some reason, I don't know what you chose, your soul has chosen to incarnate on planet Earth right now, but you have, right? So you kind of have to be d'accord with that. You have to make peace with that. And actually, as you said, like, I think that's where I also see a shift in like the spiritual community. And as much as I like that spirituality and awareness and consciousness and all of that is getting more and more popular, I think we are at a turning point now where we're like, okay, that's all nice and good, but we actually have to ground it down, because that's our realm we play in, right? In this lifetime. Totally. It's Mother Earth.
We're in the 3D right? plane where it's reality, like tangible, I guess that's a funny word, but we have physical reality here on the 3D plane. And the interesting thing is that we are multi-dimensional beings and we can exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But what we're doing is, and I think that, I think that's kind of a human ego construct as well, thinking that we initiated this evolution, but it's not, it's planet Earth initiated this evolution. She wants to ascend. She wants to move from her 3D capacity through fourth and into fifth. This is her evolutionary journey. And because we are on her and she is our mother, she is willing to take us with her. And that's, I guess, also another thing about, separation, the illusion of separation, is that she is evolving. She wants us to evolve with her. So in some ways, we kind of come with her, but we're on Earth. So we're still going to be on Earth when we evolve. It's just going to be slightly different, I think. That's the thing. Like, I'm not going to ascend to, Pleiades or the Seven Sisters or somewhere like that. I'm actually going to, in some ways, ascend my consciousness so that I can exist as a divine being in, the fourth or the fifth dimension on planet Earth. I think we forget that. On planet Earth.
We're still on it, and I think at the same time, like realizing that, I mean, how epic is that, right? We can draw him from like all those dimensions and bring it here onto planet Earth, and like I think that comes back to being like, having the sense of wonder and being in awe of our existence here, because in other dimensions you can't feel the way we feel, you can't have all these experiences we have, right? So that's why we are here. But and for me also, like especially over the last half or like the last year, for me it became so much important to really shift a little bit this perception of going somewhere else, but actually like, how do we become an epic human being, like I think we don't know that, we think like, oh yeah, that's our playground here, but actually no, we don't know how to be an epic human being here on planet Earth. We don't know it all, because we're doing a lot of shit, to be honest. And with compassion, right? With compassion, because we are on this evolutionary journey. But before we, go to wherever, 12th dimension or whatever, like, let's just first do the work here and actually know how to navigate this realm here. So, I think we are on an epic journey. It's exciting. It's challenging for sure, but like using these tools like you offer in your programs. And I really love also the idea how you wove in creativity, right? And because I think that's so important. And compared to like some more common form of therapy or so, where you're talking or something, then
Yeah.
it's always still only in your mental state, but
Yeah.
not you don't experience it somatically, right?
Right.
And you also don't create with it. So in
No,
the end,
no.
maybe it somehow shifted something there, but it's still there, and it has not shifted anything in your reality, in your tangible reality.
No, and that's a real, I think, like unpreferredness, I guess, of talk therapy or like psychotherapy or like counseling and stuff like that. Because I went through that because I had a pretty traumatic, like violent relationship that I was in. And so coming out of that, that's kind of what everyone said you do. You go to a psychiatrist and you talk about your stuff and stuff like that. And I got really, really upset with her one day. And I was like, I refuse to talk about this anymore because you're basically just making it happen for me every single time I talk about it. I'm not going to do this anymore. You need to give me better tools to equip myself so that I can move beyond this. Because you're reigniting that kind of feeling in me again, and I really didn't like it because I saw it as giving power back to that situation and back to that individual, and I wanted to pull all my power back. And so creativity for me was a way to, in some ways, purge all of those emotions, those feelings, those not enoughness, that guilt, that shame, that judgment on self and other people, and just purge it onto a canvas and leave it there. Like, that's the beautiful thing about it. I could just walk away from it and I'd left it there. And that was it. I didn't have to deal with it anymore. And it was so liberating to kind of like like draw that into the canvas and like just watch it everywhere and get it out of my system. That was probably the most cathartic kind of healing process that I ever went through, was that process of getting it out onto the canvas. And that's why creativity can be so powerful, because it's a somatic experience. And when you have that somatic experience with that like kind of emotion and energy and experience that you have gone through, it alchemizes it somehow. There's the physiology and the kind of biology that happens, and it alchemizes it, and you actually do come to a different place because of it. And it's because of the somatic involvement that happens. That, I think, is the real like linchpin that is needed. Because I mean, I could I could cerebral my way out of any situation. But I just kept re-traumatizing myself when I was talking about it and thinking about it, and I didn't want that to keep occurring. And so that's why when I came across intentional creativity, it was such a like cathartic experience, and it was just transcendent in a way. And it's because it was somatic, and because I was able to purge it out of my system, which is something I couldn't do, unfortunately, with talk therapy or traditional talk therapy.
Yeah.
So yeah. Really
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I've been through a similar experience at one stage in my life. I went to talk therapy, and I was like, as I'm really solution oriented, right? I'm like, that makes no sense. It was so funny because at the beginning, like, she didn't even start the conversation. She was just waiting for me to just talk. Probably maybe because she was used to other people, they just talk for an hour and then they leave and that's it. And I was like, where are your tools? Where are your, like, where are we going? What's the solution? What are we doing? And I don't want to just, like, talk. No. Thank you. And I also think it's beautiful what you share when you put it on the like collective scale. It's like, I feel like there's so much healing happening in creating, because that's what I thought of when you spoke about creativity, rather than fighting against something. Because when we fight against, when we just say, oh, the current system and all the manipulation and brainwashing, yeah, that's one thing. And it's, as we said, it's shadow, acknowledge it, but work with it and create something out of it, something new, right? That's where the healing is happening, not like fighting against. And as you said, also like in therapy session or so, this re-traumatization actually. And then it's really beautiful because we can begin to play again, right? I feel like when you say we have a new canvas right now, not only for ourselves when you go through the process, but like collectively, when we think about this new earth, like it's a completely new canvas. And we can
new canvas. It's unwritten in some ways. Like
it's unwritten.
Potential.
No one has done this before, so it's like, yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting thing that I came to as well. Like, if we're going to be super practical about this kind of evolution that we're going on, like when I when I analyzed it, I was like, okay, so if I give, like, all of my energy into destruction and destroying a system that doesn't work for humans and isn't sustainable for them, okay, I use all my energy for that. But then something has to be created, which means I need to use more energy. Whereas if I just turn around here and go, I'm going to pour all of my energy into creating something sustainable for everybody. Like, the energy is much more efficient and effective at creating, as opposed to pulling something down, destroying it, because then you eventually have to create something anyhow. So why not just turn away from it and create something that is going to be sustainable for everybody? And then what eventually happens is those unsustainable systems fall down and destroy themselves.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's really the way forward, to make like these old systems obsolete in a way that we create new ones, so we don't need them anymore. And I think that's we are like really at this turning point where I was, I had been for many years also in all kinds of like, in companies like change management and all of that. And I came to the realization that, well, some things just can't be changed. They have to be in a way, they have to die, and you have to start over again. And there's just a level where you say, okay, in no way, because the basis is just so, you can't build upon that.
You can't on a rotting foundation.
Yeah. Well, amazing, Alison. Thank you so much for this conversation. I feel like we can talk forever. And I definitely want to bring you on the podcast, and maybe we can choose a particular topic, maybe also talking about business in the new earth and like business templates and how to, because that's something I think it's really important now. Okay, we want to create new things, and we still, as we say, we live here. It's not only just everyone's meditating, but we create businesses, right? We still have to eat. We need all these resources and everything. And I think this is something I'm really passionate about also. Like, how do we do business in this new paradigm?
New Earth entrepreneurship is very different from business. Because it requires a shift from, I guess, those constructs of capitalism and kind of the economy and money into more of a service-based kind of quality and a impact-based quality that uses different metrics than, for instance, money. So I think that's part of the new Earth entrepreneurship model that is being created at the moment, which is actually quite exciting, because that's actually where I love to kind of dance in as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Then maybe let's choose this topic for our podcast, right? So for everyone watching, if you're interested in more, then just be a little bit patient, and I will let you know when we have our podcast ready.
Awesome.
Okay, Alison.
Thank you very much.
So have a lovely, lovely evening, right? It's late where you are right now.
Yeah, late-ish. I think it's about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock maybe. Yeah, 9:30.
All right. Okay. So talk soon again, and take care.
Thank you for your time. Ciao.
Bye-bye, Alison. See you soon.